In this week's video, we're going to look at how to start with load development. I've been getting more and more questions lately about where to actually start when it comes to reloading and load development in general. Unfortunately, some reloaders, myself included, probably go into further detail than some of the beginners are ready for all too quickly. I've already done several videos on reloading equipment, so if you're looking for that, I'm going to link a playlist at the end of today's video. But for today's video, it's all about how to get started with load development. Now for the example we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be discussing .308 Winchester. But if that's not what you're specifically interested in, fear not. The information is going to apply to far more calibers than that. We're going to cover where to find this information and how to apply it to your application. Before going too far down this rabbit hole, I want to make it clear. Having published load data for the load you would like to test is always where you should start, especially if you're not experienced. It's a bad idea to just start internet searching for load data and looking at safe for my rifle loads. I understand that when there are a lot of options, sometimes it's hard to find that starting point. So how do you know what projectile to start with and what powder works? Try looking for something that's been around a while and a lot of people have had success with. When you're just starting out, it's probably not a good idea to try and break new ground right out of the gate. Looking for a load that people have had a lot of success with is a good place to start. Looking at the internet is not a bad idea, but when you're looking at reviews, make sure you're concentrating on what application they're actually using it in. If you have a factory rifle, you might not want to go looking for guys that have their rifles chambered for specific projectiles for component advice. So let's go into a couple resources. If you're loading for more common calibers, this will be a lot easier because there is a lot of info for those willing to search. Now our test platform today is a Remington 700 chambered in .308 Winchester. One of the good sources that we'll cover today is the Dan Newberry Optimal Charge Weight Load Development website. It has some good general information. Lots of things on the website are worth the read, but one of my favorite sections is the load section. Same rules apply, don't just load it and go. Working up to these loads is always a good idea if you can find load data to support these loads. But just because your application may not be listed here doesn't mean there aren't known good loads for your caliber. If the information there doesn't suit your taste, another favorite website of mine is Precision Rifle Blog, especially the section of what the pros use. Sometimes it's easier to see what the guys are actually having success using. Winning is not an accident, and usually there's a couple of good choices to choose from. And again, look at some load data. Some of these guys are going to be loading way over max. Find some load data within published limits, and that's likely at least where you're going to want to start. Worth mentioning on this topic is we're not always looking for the highest ballistic coefficient projectile. At least starting out, looking for something that people are having an easy time getting good results is where I would start. Don't punish yourself trying to get that highest ballistic coefficient projectile to perform, or the cheapest ones you can find to perform well either. If you see a projectile that tons of manufacturers are using in their factory offerings, it's a pretty good clue that it works. And that's also going to be true for our example today. Now, in talking with .308 Winchester, the 175 grain Match King is not a new or cutting edge offering, but it is something that people are having good luck with and is commonly available. Conveniently, it also happens to be a listing on Dan Newberry's website that we mentioned earlier. The data we're going to talk about today is also very likely the same that Felder uses in their gold medal match ammunition. We've tested this before with very acceptable results. The Federal Gold Medal Match line, especially in .308, is pretty well renowned for working well in a wide range of applications. This particular load is also very likely to be similar or the exact same thing that's also known as Mark 316 Mod 0. Not to get off on too far of a tangent here, but a quick search of MK316 Mod 0 and you probably can find the build sheet for it. This lists the exact recipe that it uses. Federal cases, 210M primers. If you're worried about using a proprietary powder, no worries, this build sheet lists good old IMR 4064. And the projectile specified is the Sierra 175 grain Match King. They leave little to question, even the charge weight's listed at 41.745 grains. Not that we need to measure it that accurately. Now, even in this case, I'm still going to tell you start low and work up. What does that mean? Again, we're going back to load data. Since it's a Sierra projectile, we're going to talk about Sierra load data. Sierra's safe minimum for IMR 4064 is 39.1 grains, so certainly we're not going to be going any lower than that. Sierra's listed max is 43.2 grains. So, with our load source at 41.8 grains, it's very likely that this is well into safe territory. But for today's example, I decided to use 15 pieces of brass to learn. Since I have not used this particular lot, or even this powder actually at all, it's always smart to play it safe. Now one thing about .308 cases that we probably should talk about is case volume. There are large differences between different brands of brass. So when it comes to safety, there's no real reason to be silly. But for today's test, I'm going to take that max value of 43.2 grains, add 0.2 of a grain, and then we're going to be stepping backwards in 0.2 of a grain increments for the number of samples that we have. If you want to do 10, maybe you would want to step back a little bit further, but today's test will essentially have two goals. The first is to look for pressure signs as we increase the charge weight to make sure the charge weights are safe for our platform. The other thing is we'll be actually monitoring the velocity as we increase the charge weight. This will become important later. For today's test, we're going to take it all the way out to max and just a little bit past, looking for pressure signs along the way. Now, what are we looking for? First, ejector marks on a case head, flattened primers, and primer cratering. When looking for pressure, we need to understand how our specific rifle reacts. Another reason that having little factory ammo to set a baseline for our expectations is usually a good idea. Reading pressure signs is a video on its own, but it's not rocket science. Certainly something to research when you're getting ready to fire your first rounds of reloads. So, what have we put together here? 1. A well-documented, good-performing load. It might not be the highest performance, but it's a consistent performer. Number 2. Easy-to-find components. Even with our current supply constraints, I had no problem finding the 175 grain Sierra Match Kings in stock or IMR 4064. This might not be the best combination ever put together, but it's certainly a common one and it's consistent. The third thing we have is load data confirming that the combination we intend to test is safe to start with. In secret option number 4, though not a requirement, we've even found factory ammunition that uses essentially this very combination in this caliber. And since we were able to test it, we know it works well. The 15 rounds we've tested gave us an average velocity of 25.52 feet per second, a standard deviation of 6.8, an extreme spread of 26, and a couple of groups that were just over half an MOA. Seems like a good place to start for me. Now that we have all these things in place, we can run our test. I'm not going to tell you that a chronograph is a must, but it will make this process faster, at least in my opinion. It's a personal decision to know what your time is worth, what budget you're working with, and how many components you're going to waste and how much time you want to use for testing. So going over all the load data for today's test, we were using Federal cases, 3 times fired, so today's test will be the 4th firing. The cartridge overall length we're actually mimicking off of our factory ammunition is 2.807 inches with a CBTO of 2.217 inches. The primer we're using is a Federal 210M primer, basically the same as called out in our datasheet. Our projectile for today's test is the 175 grain Sierra Match King, part number 2275. Our powder data for today is IMR 4064. Our starting charge is going to be 40.6 grains, going up in 0.2 of a grain increments to 43.4 grains. When we actually fired these rounds, we started at our lowest charge and moved up, looking for pressure signs along the way. So now we kind of understand how we got our load data and what our load data became. Let's look at the results of our test. Starting at 40.6 grains, our velocity started at 2460 feet per second. As we tested all these charge weights, our max charge of 43.4 grains gave us a velocity of 2616 feet per second, though we saw identical max velocities of 2622 feet per second at both 43 and 43.2 grains. There are several interesting points that I want to draw our attention to on this chart. The first is what the heck are we really looking for? What we typically want to see is there are several points on our graph where the velocity change is very small as we increase the charge weight. I'll call these a plateau, a node, pick your term, it doesn't really matter. But this is where we're looking for to find the most forgiving load. Essentially, these areas should be the least affected by temperature and may even be able to be thrown reliably with a powder measure and still get generally repeatable results. Since the bill sheet I referred to basically had a data point at 41.8 grains, that's the first part I'd like to look at our chart. The velocity we saw at 41.8 grains was 2530 feet per second. We can see the velocities here aren't identical, but they don't change significantly. From 41.6 grains to 42 grains, our extreme spread is only 15 feet per second. The velocity here is a little under the average that we saw with our factory ammunition, but holding true to what we found, it's highly likely this is going to be a good performer. The next point of interest on our chart is at 42.4 grains. Why this is an interesting point is before we fired the cartridges, I actually took weights on all of them, did some math, figuring out what the weights of everything would be to back calculate the average powder charge that was actually in the case. The best I can tell without actually pulling the projectiles, our powder charge was somewhere around 42.3 or 42.4 grains. That combination gave us 25.52 feet per second, standard deviation of 6 with an extreme spread of 26. Looking at our chart at 42.4 grains, we were right on that 25.51 velocity number. So maybe the powder they're using is good old IMR 4064. Not to go off on too far of a tangent, in one of the comments from one of my excellent viewers, they pointed me to a website where it looked like Federals possibly had switched to AR comp for this particular combination. That may or may not be the case, I don't really know, but maybe Federal has switched back to IMR 4064 because they're having just as much luck at getting AR comp as I am, but who knows. but at 42.4 grains, 2551 feet per second is what we saw, which was identical to what the average velocity was that we measured from our factory loads. The next point of interest is right up at that max charge. At 43.2 grains, it looks like there's a very nice velocity plateau right at max. While velocity is nice, sometimes that lower reliable load might be your best bet. Loading at that lower node might also extend the life of your brass significantly. So don't hesitate to ask yourself how much you need that extra velocity for your application. There's nothing wrong with trying a higher node, but when there are hundreds of reports that lower spot is very good, it's very hard to ignore. Oh, the problems of reloading, too many good options to choose from. So I'm sure someone's going to comment that, well, I can't get X powder, or I prefer to try more stable powders, but many powders will work. Find another. While probably even more temperature sensitive than IMR 4064, rumors are that Federal used to actually use Reloader 15. If you're new, get started. If you can get your process down, you're very likely going to be able to outperform factory ammunition regardless of what powder you're using. The first step is getting started. I will warn you, when you first start seeing those groups shrink, you might just get hooked at reloading for life. But if you're a tinkerer like I am, every day at the range isn't going to work the way you want. But you're going to learn and do better the next time. By starting out with something you have high confidence in, you're going to gain confidence, try new things, and then determine if it was worth it. Most importantly, you're likely going to get in more practice. Nothing is going to make you a better shooter than more practice. Another good thing to mention is actually mentioned on Dan Newberry's website as well, is if you're looking for particular load data, one of the resources he points to is the Nosler Manual. The Nosler Manual, and I believe honestly most of it is posted online, aside from having load data, also has accuracy data. It will tell you for the powders they have available, what charges they actually had the best accuracy with. But if you're looking for good load data, the Nosler Manual will be an option. Sarah actually lists the most accurate load tested in their section, but Nosler also actually includes the charge weight for the powder they tested for their accuracy information. Your results may vary, but again, it's always a good place to start. If you've got the bug now and you're dying to get started reloading, check out this playlist where we talk about presses, dies, and all the other equipment you may want to check out before you get started. Be patient and get what's right for your application, not what someone else tells you is right for you. If you have any questions or feedback, that's what the comment section below is for. If you like more content like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss next week's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you come back next week. And until then, stay safe and small groups.